Stillwater?
Where's your gavel? Can
Oh.
you gavel?
Yeah, Mike, you did great. We'll call our Village of New Glarus Board meeting to order. We'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please have all cell phones silenced during the meeting. I look for approval of the agenda.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Public appearances and citizens' comments. No debate will occur on the board on items introduced by citizens. Items will not be acted upon at this meeting, but will be referred to the proper staff or committee if action is required. Does anyone here to speak at the public forum? Okay, Brooke?
Sure. So we just wanted to invite, I'm Brooke, this is Corinne. We just wanted to invite the members of the village to a documentary screening this Saturday at the New Glarus Library at 3:30. The documentary is titled No Small Matter, and it is about the early years for children and how we are all, as a community, stakeholders in their well-being, regardless if they are our children or not, and what that means to us as a community, how we can help support young children.
How long is it film?
It's an hour.
Hour and 10 minutes. But there'll be a discussion period after about kind of, we can talk about whatever, but it's normally about what we see in our community that needs it, how we can support early childhood educators, how we can support the child care world, and get into really how it affects our social well-being, welfare, police, everything with those early investments.
So 3 weeks ago, we showed it at the Capitol for the legislators. It has been shown to circuit court judges in Milwaukee, and to all watch it. So it's gaining momentum, and it's not about influence, it's about awareness about what's important for us and what that means to us as the stakeholders in the community.
We've got a flyer, and so we're just asking that if enough of you will be there for a quorum, that you make sure that you post it, because you're not necessarily talking about village board items, but just in case there's a quorum, so nobody has a problem with that. But here's the flyer, so you can see that. There is also a YouTube trailer. If you just search No Small Matter trailer, it's
I'm gonna be
next.
out of town,
Okay.
unfortunately.
No.
For our 3-year-old granddaughter.
The library has free childcare.
Does she?
Barb's gonna be one of them.
She would enjoy that.
Yeah, so there is free childcare in the library. We did figure it out. And then there will be another one in March in Belleville, and we are working on Monticello, etc. There are communities across the country, mayors are, and villages and cities are sponsoring it. It's being sponsored pretty much by, you name it, it's getting sponsored. So it is a really huge nationwide.
Yeah, I've heard of it in other places.
Yeah, and we've been really fortunate here in New Glarus. UW Whitewater has shown it several times, and they've had 20 or 30 people. Our last showing at the Growing Tree had over 60. So we definitely have, and people were still interested in asking, and that's why we're doing another one. So, all right.
Okay.
If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either one of us.
Thank you.
Hope to see you there.
Okay, Barb?
Okay, I just have a question. Is the issue of moving the chalet, is that up for vote tonight? Are you
Yes.
voting on it tonight? All right, then,
Well, they have the
Discussion.
You have the option of voting that.
okay. Well, I'm on the Historic Preservation Commission, and I have some comments regarding the chalet that I think maybe need to be said. We had a meeting last night, and honestly, nobody on the commission even knew this was happening. I think it would be good for if you're wanting Historical Preservation Commission to take over overseeing the chalet, that we should know about it and have some input. So I'm going to apologize right now to the chalet folks, because they worked so hard to make the chalet a viable attraction. You have put your heart and your soul into this local treasure. But moving the responsibility for overseeing of the chalet to the Historical Preservation Commission will not solve anything, and frankly, it's not the issue. I think the issue is this. The Village of New Glarus does not want to, nor can it afford to continue operating the chalet. It's a costly venture that despite valiant effort on the part of the Friends of the Chalet, continues to lose money. The one suggestion that was made to this board from the Historical Preservation Commission, by the way, to increase the room tax to help defray the cost of running the chalet has died on the table. Historical Preservation has no budget, and as far as I can tell from reading the village statutes, no mandate to operate anything or oversee the operation of anything. I think it's time for this board to actually deal with the chalet issue, either keep it or don't. If you keep it, fund it. If you don't keep it, find someone who will give it the care and respect it deserves. Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak? Okay. Item 6, I look for approval of the consent agenda.
Move for approval. Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Finance and personnel. Item A, presentation by Dave Ferris from Ellers for water and electric system revenue bonds.
Sit or
Okay, go, whatever you want to do, that's fine, come up and stay.
Well, thank you for letting me come back for what, 4th or 5th time this year? I appreciate the chance to be here. You should have in your packet the pre-sale report.
Starts on page 9.
Looks a little bit like this without my notes on it. So how did we get here? Basically, Drake reached out to us, and John Cameron came to a meeting and kind of spoke to you a little bit about how to fund the electric utility projects. And with the collaboration between the village and Ellers and the Forester?
Yeah, correct.
We were able to come up with a financing plan for the projects that they had proposed to have you upgrade your system. So as we go through the list of projects are in here, but this is kind of how we got to the point that we're at, where we're asking for an authorization for a borrowing to fund those projects. So this is the pre-sale report, which takes that information that we've gathered together from the financial aspect or the construction aspect and memorializes basically the planning that's gone in to come to this point to be able to authorize the revenue bonds for the electric and water utility. So if you turn to page 1 of my thing, I don't know what yours is, 10. This is the beginning, what we're taking to the market is $1,540,000 of water and electric system revenue bonds. The projects include projects from 19, 20, and a little bit of 21. At first we were going to do just the 19 and 20, but when it looked like we might end up being back here doing another borrowing in a year, it didn't make sense. So we ended up keeping the borrowing at the $1.5 million that John had talked about previously so that we could fund some of the projects in 21, and that way you'd have a little bit more space in between the borrowings and be able to go forward with doing some of the projects and then some of the planning for the phase 2 projects. So if you turn to page 7, you can see the list of projects that engineers provided to us. We have it laid out so you can see the years that the projects are going to actually occur. Phase 1 happens in 19 and 20, and then part of phase 2 starts happening in 2020 and continues into 2023. But we have this divided into 2 borrowings. $1.4 million in project costs will be borrowed for with the 19 borrowing that we're undergoing now, and then we'll come back late 2021 with the projects that are, it's the next picture, which will be the projects that are remaining on the phase 2. So that those project numbers on the bottom part, where it says sources of funding, kind of flow into the schedule on page 6. This is the sizing of the 2 different borrowings. So we have the 19 borrowing. You can see the $1,463,000 that came off of that last schedule that has the projects in it. There's a calculation that has to be done because revenue bonds require a certain amount of money to be set aside. It's a covenant that's required. So we have to recalculate how much the amount should be set aside. We have to take into account the 15 bonds and I think the 10 bonds or something like that, and they all have to be considered in the calculation. So when we got done calculating it, the reserve needed to go up to 191,000. You have 170,000 on hand that will be rolled into that, so we need to fund about $21,000 of that reserve in addition to those project costs to be in compliance with bond covenants. And then you have the issuance expenses. These are estimates at this time. We usually go to the market with this in the proposal. What comes back is some of these get tightened up along the way. The bond council gives us a letter saying how much they're going to be. The underwriter, we have it in at the maximum amount as 12.5, but they rarely take that amount. So there'll be some downsizing in that amount. And then the paying agent is the fee that the village is using to set up this issue as being a bond trust service paying agent client. So after you take those costs into account, there's some interest earnings that we'll earn on the bonds while they are waiting for us to spend. And then because bonds have to be issued in increments of 5,000, that's why that rounding amount's there, so we can get to a $5,000. So the 19 bonds that we're proposing are $1,540,000. Obviously the 21 bonds, it's out there ways, but at this time about $1,925,000 would be what would be brought back in a couple of years. Hopefully engineering costs are a little conservative, so that'll take into the inflation, but you never know, right? So on page 8 is the way that the bonds have been structured. Both the $1.5 million that we're talking about now, and we took into account the $1.9 million because it's important when we're doing this to take a look at the coverage test, which is on the next page, but this is how we had to lay it out so that we were sure that the coverage out in future years was good. And so if you turn to the next page, you can see that those combination of those two issues, size or the debt repayment schedules, flow into this future revenue debt right in the middle on page, what do you got there at the bottom of that one?
Nothing.
Okay, so it's my 9.
It's 18.
18
Okay.
for us.
18 for you. So that middle,
See these page numbers?
It's hidden in the logo.
oh, that darn logo.
Okay.
You know, if we had that smaller one before, it probably would have fit fine. So we've got the debt repayment schedules are wrapped together in this one so that we can come over to the second column for the right called coverage. You need to have a minimum, according to the bonds, of 1.25 of net revenues to show health, and that's what the covenants say you have to have. If you don't have that, you're kind of in violation of that. And in cases where you're getting close, it might be time that you have to have a rate study. But as you can tell from this, we don't get very close to that. 1.84 looks like the lowest out in 2020, which is next year, and it looks like our coverage actually looks really good going forward. So we're in good shape as far as that goes.
Dave, are these total operating revenues based on current rates?
They are probably out of the audit report from 2018.
So, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I assume that's what John used when he put the numbers together.
And then this is a non-rated borrowing
Yes.
because we aren't borrowing enough?
No, a lot of it has to do with the size of the entity and whether or not, if you were big enough to be a AA, I would say yes. But basically when you're not rated, you're an A. And so to pay money to get rated, which would be about, probably about $10,000 to $15,000 to have a rating agency look at you, just to end up at the same rating you would get classified as a non-rated, doesn't really make a lot of sense. So, I mean, if you, for some reason, had a lot of growth, really like double the size of the village, you might end up having enough value that would be worth it. But we don't rate the village because of the size and some of the financial figures just don't line up with a AA rating. So, okay. And then back Well, I might as well show you the graph first, and then we'll go back to some of the pre-sale written stuff. But as you can see, we're still in a very good rate environment. These are actually this is the revenue bond. It says, I think it talks a little bit more about the bond buyers, which is, I think some of that is GO, but the orange line is actually the revenue bond index. So we're in a really good place. I kind of wanted to do like 3.5 years because you could see where we were like in June, and those numbers are really comparable in June. But in 2016, rates really climbed a lot, and right now we're kind of still seeing them sitting around, and hopefully that'll stay that way for a month from now when I come back with your sale results. So cross your fingers that something funky doesn't happen and we end up with high rates, like maybe the market takes off and nobody wants to be in bonds again. So back on what would be my page 1, which is the page right after the cover page. What page is that?
Page 10 of the packet.
Let me know when you guys are there. Okay. All right, that's one. So about a third of the way down, there's a feature called Term Call Feature. On May 1st of 2027, if it makes sense to refinance these because interest rates are really good at that time, and because if you looked at the repayment schedules, the interest rates end up climbing as you go. So maybe at that date, if you're sitting at let's see what we got here, a 3.2% or a 3% interest rate. No, it's not that good then. 2.85. So let's say it's a lot lower than that at that point. Maybe if we run an analysis, which we do annually for you anyways, kind of keeping an eye on whether we can refinance something for savings. If it makes sense at that time, you can refund those and then get a better interest rate. And we'll keep an eye on that and see if that makes sense, and we'll bring that forward if it makes sense. So, we're not going to rate this as we talked about. So on the next page is the method of sale. We're going to take this to the open market for competitive bids. I think we did really well with like 5 or 6 bids for the village's GO. Hopefully we'll have that kind of interest again, and obviously the more bids we get, the better rates we get. So hopefully we'll have interest in this as well, like we did for the GO. And then on my page 3, risk factors. Really the only risk factor here is that your light and electric utility, or your light and water utility, doesn't have enough money. As long as, based on the coverage, that looks like you have money, hopefully the cash reserves are good and your rates are in place, are doing a really good job, which I think they probably are. The only reason that this is a concern is if for some reason you don't have the cash to pay your debt, then you are required to cover that with the shortfall with tax levy. And one thing that's nice about that, which hopefully you don't ever have to use it, is that it's something that you can use in the levy limits outside of the levy limit, like the regular GO debt, so it doesn't affect how much you levy for your operations. But we're not going to see that because you guys are in great shape. So just something I have to tell you about. The next page is your cast of characters that have a part in this. Quarles and Brady is your bond counsel. Bond Trust Services is your paying agent. And just so you know what a paying agent is what we do is we have an arm of our company that will send out notices on a payment coming due. And I think, Lynn, didn't you say there was one that came about 2 months ago, and then you got another reminder just recently? So it's kind of an insurance policy. But where it comes in really big is sometimes underwriters, when they do their bids, will lump 2 maturities together called a term bond. And the thing is when they do that and you're making that first payment, you actually have to do a call on that second maturity. And if you're not aware of that, you can actually be in default, and then that'll affect, like a day when you actually do get rated. That would be something that would have to be reported to EMA, which is the regulatory agency, and it would probably make underwriters think that maybe you're a little shaky. So it's something that gives you a little bit of insurance, you won't miss any payments, and it gives you an invoice to pay off too, which depository trust isn't necessarily giving you a whole lot anymore.
No, and they email you at the last moment, because that's
Yeah.
what happened with this last payment.
Okay.
The initial 2019.
Yeah. And James is working with you to convert
Yeah.
the rest? Okay.
Yeah, we got that figured out, but
Okay, great.
it's kind of last minute.
Then on the next page, which is the last page I'll talk off of, there's the calendar of events. I'm here today. We're going to talk with Beth, then maybe Drake on the week of actually the morning of the 19th. We're going to do a call where we're going to review the official statement, make sure it's accurate, and hopefully when it goes to the market, there's everything in there that needs to be for an investor to make a good choice. The official statement comes out after that on the 22nd, and then we'll be back here on the 3rd with results of the sale on the morning of the 3rd, and then the village will receive the money to start paying for electric utility project costs on December 19th. Any questions I can answer?
I have one question about the, you were talking about. Well, one question I had, you said that you used the maximum underwriter's discount at 12.5, but you said that that hardly ever happens. What's
Yeah,
the
that's-
reasonable amount that would be?
It depends. I mean, because the way that the underwriters actually win the bid is by not taking as much. So what it means is they're not taking as much compensation for
Okay.
doing their work. So if you want to be the one that buys the village's bonds and then sells them to investors, you sharpen your pencil. So
Okay.
that's one of the areas where they do it. The other thing that you probably will see, we're still in a premium market. They may throw a little more cash at this, and what that does is that lets them kind of pop up those early interest rates artificially, and it makes it more attractive to investors. So we've had an email with staff, and it sounds like if we have a premium, we may keep that money instead of downsizing it like we did for the GO. Remember, we reduced the amount of the borrowing for the general obligation because we are funding projects in 2021, and it's kind of just to carry us over. So if we can get that money at a good rate now, it'll be less we'll have to borrow later.
Later, okay.
So.
And then my other question was in the debt service reserve, you said we have 170 on hand. We need to have 191, we're short 20. Where is that 20?
It's part of the borrowing.
It's part of the borrowing.
Yeah, so when
Okay.
we go into the market, we have to run a calculation that takes a couple of your past revenue bonds into, because it's called, they're on parity, which means they have to be considered as one.
Okay.
And so you add the three of them together to the calculation that I don't do it, Kathy does it for us.
Okay.
And this is the amount based on those amounts that you have to have
Oh, okay.
once the new bonds are in place.
Okay.
But at this point, you have 107, you actually have a little bit more that you're gonna use towards debt repayment, I think, right? In
Oh,
your-
we have more in there than
Yeah,
is necessary right now.
yeah, so I think we talked about you could use that for redemption purposes, so.
So is this considered like the pledge then, or is like a gross pledge or net pledge? Is that is my understanding that you have to have?
Well, it's, bond covenants require that you have a certain amount of money set aside for, I think it's probably kind of rainy day kind of a cost. And so this is something that is always in a revenue bond covenant. It's pretty, actually, it's standard. It's not even pretty much, it is standard, so. Yeah, so since the village wants to keep what it has in excess right now to go towards redemption, we're putting 20,000 into the borrowing to fund the reserve.
I just,
Is that standard
Yeah.
for a lot of?
Yes, yeah, I just was in Stoughton a couple weeks ago, and they jumped up about 60,000. So you actually had a pretty, it's not driving your number up a lot, so it isn't a big number to fund it.
so we need to do something with this motion.
I think there's a resolution.
Yep, so the next item after the presentation, you'll see
Resolution.
And I don't know that you have to do a roll call, but I usually just have you do it because it's safer.
So can you just tell me what page the resolution?
Page 20, it's resolution 19-34.
And this resolution was prepared by Don Council for us.
I move to adopt resolution number 19-34.
Want to roll call? Okay. Mike Bell?
Yes.
Mike Ancher?
Yes.
Katie Cruz?
Yes.
Tammy Newberry?
Yes.
Jeff Phillipson?
Yes.
Peter Strike?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes. Motion carries 7-0. Okay.
We'll see you in a month.
Thank you.
Yep, okay, sounds good.
What's that?
You have the shrinking chair.
Oh, was I going down? I kind of felt like I was coming.
So that's where it got moved to, because I was just like, oh, okay.
Down there.
Usually.
And you had the camera focused on it. Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 8, Public Works, Public Safety, consideration, discussion, and adoption of ordinance 19-4 to amend section 288-20, limitations on parking during certain times. That's on 21, your packet. Great.
Yep, so New Glarus Post Office contacted the village regarding overnight parking of post office vehicles in a public parking area. The post office was recently informed that they would be assuming new rural routes which require 2 post office vehicles to complete delivery. The post office owns insufficient land to park these vehicles overnight. The attached ordinance contains an amendment to create an exception to the overnight parking prohibition on Railroad Street. Official post office parking signage would be installed. The exception does not apply to any personal vehicles used by post office staff. So it will designate 2 spots for post office vehicles. So the typical, not a vehicle that is happened to be driven by a post office employee, but actual federal employee, federal vehicles.
Those that are actually labeled.
Correct. This went to Public Works and Public Safety, and they recommended approval. Joe would get the signs installed if it was approved, and that would essentially rectify the situation for the post office.
So in other words, when that post office trucks are out delivering, those stalls are going to not be able to be used then.
Correct.
So that's 2 less parking places downtown all the time. Yeah. But I don't know, how do you say no to the post office? I mean, it's kind of like,
Well, I wish they could have just been able to grab a stall when they came back, you know, that was
Yeah.
open.
oh, so I don't,
Instead of
yeah.
designating 2 stalls to them.
What if you don't designate them? So can we make it where we just allow them to park overnight? But then,
It was brought up, the PD and Public Works had preferred the signage, just so that there's less confusion. If a citation had to be issued for someone parking
right,
overnight or in a spot.
and then it's just so hard to say when they would come back from their routes, would there be an open spot?
These, if I remember correctly from our meeting, these routes are just really primarily there for Christmas time, where there's going to be a higher demand for delivering on these routes.
That's when they anticipate needing 2 vehicles every day. At peak times, they would need 2 vehicles.
So would they
Other times,
remove
they
the
would
signs
always-
when they're not in use or cover
Other,
the signs?
they'll always need, they've told us they will always need 1, and oftentimes will need 2.
They changed the routes from Belleville. We picked up 2 routes from Belleville, that's what it was. So 2 of those routes were shifted from down there, from up there to down here.
Right,
And then when we talked about it, and Joe can chime in too, it's easier to have the designated stalls specifically for them versus a car here, a car there for
Right.
both us for enforcement, and I think for you guys for snow removal and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
It's easier to go back and clean 2 stalls than it is a hopscotch or
Yeah,
whatever,
right.
so.
I can just see the frustration with our tourists, but, you know, life is the way it is.
Well, not only tourists, I mean, I come down to pick up.
To pick up your own mail, yeah, there's
Even then, it's
nothing
hard
else
to
to
find
buy.
somebody.
Yeah.
If my wife is with me, I'll drop her off and drive
Drive
home.
around the block and, yeah.
No, she can.
There's not a way to give those stalls some flexibility, is there, now that I'm thinking about it? For example, you know, that from 5 o'clock on, this stall is,
The trouble is with that, Peggy, if they're done with their road at 1 o'clock,
yeah.
then who's gonna go and park the
Who's
vehicle?
gonna go move the vehicle?
So I think we have to go with the sign.
Just-
As much as I hate
But
to do
I
that,
know,
Right.
but I think we're just gonna have to tie up them 2 stalls and who knows? In a year, this could all change again, so.
And those were the
Usually
only 2
back to
stalls that we came up with. I mean, it doesn't say it has, I guess this is the time to talk about it. If you had to change which 2 or where the 2 were, but those would be the easiest because they're right out the back door of the people.
Right.
Of the post office, so that's, I think, was the reasoning behind those 2 stalls.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm arguing that, I'm just, you know, it's just frustrating to have more parking like tied up.
All right.
But, I can see the point, so.
Well, I would move to amend the section on the parking to accommodate these 2 parking stalls.
A second.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 9, Parks and Recreation. Consideration, discussion, adoption of ordinance 1903 to amend section 16-10, Historical Preservation Commission.
So this is on page 22 of your packet. I do apologize, the title does contain a typo. It should say, Historic Preservation Commission instead of Parking Regulations.
Yeah.
That's okay. And then the changes essentially are moving jurisdiction over the Chalet of the Golden Fleece from the Parks and Recreation Committee to the Historic Preservation Commission. The Parks and Recreation Committee discussed this and determined the Chalet would be better served. It was overseen by the Historic Preservation Commission. The amendment was drafted and is included in the packet. The amendment does also change the memberships of requirements of the commission and specify its duties as related to the Chalet of the Golden Fleece. So if you've ever looked at the current Historic Preservation Commission ordinance, it has a number of an architect, real estate agent, a historian requirements in there. And that this change would eliminate that to having 1 board member, 2 representatives. It should read from the Friends of the Chalet of the Golden Fleece. And the remaining 4 members would be citizens at large, or if a citizen of the village is not available, then it could be from a non-resident as well. So you'll see, if you look at it, sorry, I've lost my page of it now, but
22.
thank you.
Do you have any comments to make on that change?
I guess we're just completely flabbergasted by Barb's
comments and the fact that the Historical Preservation Committee wasn't officially notified that this was possibly coming their way.
Yeah,
I think,
I mean, it's gonna be really hard to work with them if that's how they feel about us. I mean, we just thought this was an understanding that rather than being on the Park and Rec group, we should be on the Historical Preservation because it made more sense, but obviously they have, I don't know.
well, and I wonder what, expectations, and just briefly talking with Barb, she commented, we don't have any money for this. I'm assuming the budgets are picked up and moved from Parks and Rec to Historical Preservation and that. So, perhaps it would be best if the parties reconvened expectations were
I-
laid out
We didn't
and
anticipate.
better
I was-
understanding of how this is
And
gonna
it
work.
was my mistake for not having thought of that and gone to historic preservation. It made so much sense to us, and we talked to you
Yeah,
a number of
yeah,
times about where you'd want to be.
I thought there was some informal discussion between myself and some members of that board, but, you know, again, it wasn't
informal
official.
at best, yeah.
I was just gonna make a motion
Came up
to,
with the idea.
well, table the issue, not because I have anything, objections or anything, but it's a gathering information. I just found out about this late Friday afternoon, and since the Preservation Commission had a meeting last night under future projects, I brought this up for discussion. We were all blindsided by it.
Okay.
So it's not that we don't want it, it's just that we know nothing about it.
Okay,
Why don't you make a motion to table this until we have a more inclusive discussion?
Well, I did make a motion to table it, but yes, obviously
You
until...
said you were going to, but you didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I make a motion to table the issue.
I'll second
until-
that.
Okay. Any further discussion?
we would just like to ask that, you know, perhaps we could be present at some of these discussions.
Thanks.
Certainly, you should be.
Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Okay, no president's report, no administrator's report, any further business?
Budget public hearing next time?
November 19th. Public hearing, just a reminder.
Time on that?
7 o'clock.
What was that? Sorry.
It's got the
Budget hearing.
So, yeah.
WPPA again. Work session.
And that's November
Night two.
19th. Yes, we have that on our calendars right
So there will be one.
No, right, hopefully finalized.
And I have a request. Do you have another copy of the budget?
There's another question.
Is a copy?
Yeah.
I can copy, you mean what we handed out the last?
Yeah, and I can't, I dug through all my stuff and I may have inadvertently, or my wife threw it out.
Yeah, we can get you a copy.
All in favor?
Did I say we were adjourned?
It's gonna be a-
Not yet.
We are adjourned.